Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Love, and I'm the CIO of IT World Canada, ITWC, and I'm your host for today's webinar. The webinar is entitled Leveraging Azure Cloud, an Essential Step in Your Digital Transformation. Now, we got some great content for you today, but before we get started, and we will take care of a few housekeeping items, and those of you who've joined me in a webinar before, you can sing along while I do this. The one thing, first of all, we want to make these as interactive as possible. So please, at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, there is an Ask a Question box. So if you can type in your questions and do it throughout the webinar, we're happy to see that interaction for you. If something comes up and we can answer it through the webinar, we will. If not, we'll get to them at the end. But put the questions in there. And as an added incentive, I'll have the Jim Love Challenge here, and that is the best question that gets raised through the webinar, I'm going to send you a coffee card, all on me. So there's a big contest in there. So win the Jim Love Award and ask the greatest question in the webinar. As well as the questions, we're going to be asking a few poll questions throughout this presentation. So please turn your pop-up blocker off and participate in the polls. So they're great because they'll help us understand better where you are, what your current situation is, and what your interests are, and make this as relevant as possible. Now, we'll make every effort to get you back to work on time. So we start and finish on time. We started on time, so that we're 50% of the way there. But stick around to get the full impact of the program. I've talked to the guys who are preparing this thing, and there's some great stuff. And as well, the question period is always great for getting some additional information. At the end of this, watch for a thank you email from me in there. So, and you'll get that email, and it'll contain the download link to the presentation. So if you're waiting for a copy of the presentation, don't worry about it. We'll share that with you at the end of this webinar in there. Matter of fact, I think you can even download it from the left-hand side of your page. But if it's not there, don't worry about it. We'll send it to you. But as a thank you for doing one more thing for us, so that's my Steve Jobs moment, one more thing. We're going to send you an evaluation form at the end of this presentation. Please fill it out. Give us your opinions. Give us good, bad, whatever, but give us your comments. We want to know how to make these presentations better for you. And a thank you for everyone who does that. We will send you a $10 coffee card within the month of the webinar. My staff has to get those all together and send them out, so it'll take them a little while, but we'll send you a thank you for that. And take a moment, complete the evaluation form, and give us your feedback, and that's a wonderful thing. So that's it. That's the housekeeping. Now we'll move on to the program, which is why you came here. I don't know about all of you. I'm fascinated. I've been really looking forward to this webinar because we have some guys with some real expertise in this area, and it's talking about something that everybody's talking about. And I don't know, you can't have a conversation these days without somebody talking about the Azure cloud. And I keep hearing about it, and even on our shop, we're doing some experimentation with it, and it's top of mind. And you hear some fantastic things about this, but the real question for everybody is, how does this really knit with my cloud journey? Does it give me the speed and scale that I need? Does it give me some of the functionality I need? And especially if we're talking to line of business executives and all of those sorts of things, we want to be able to get a great story. And so we've got a great story for you today on this, and I think you're going to like it. Joining me today for this conversation with you are our special guests from a firm called Stratiform, and I've got Jason Bank, he's a senior consultant there, Chris Holdsworth, who's the solutions architect, and Jason Kurtenbach, he's the field CTO and the enterprise architect. So we have them with us there. So welcome, Jason. You're out there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in today. Hey, guys.
Chris, you're there, and Justin.
Yep, you bet.
Yeah, okay, so we're all here. Fabulous. So we're going to go through this. So I'm going to start out by and I talked to you about polls in the audience there. So we're going to put the audience through some polls, guys. So let's ask our first poll. So we'll move to our first poll. We'll talk about that. And here's one. I'm always curious about this. What are the key elements that you're looking for in cloud deployment? You're all out there. So jump in and answer. You can answer. I think choose the top 3. I think is what we asked you to do. So if you could just get in there and just answer which you think are the top 3 things. Is it backup? Is it disaster recovery? Is it security? Is it less complexity? Is it the scalability? Is it faster implementation times? Is it reduced costs in there? So we get the poll out there. So thank you. You're making me wait on this one. You're keeping me in suspense. Come on, everybody. Let's just takes a second to go in there and fill out the things. Good for you. Okay, that's better. That's better. Now you're making me feel better. Okay, so we're starting to see the backup is in there, and backup's in there. Guys, you can see the numbers as they're building in there as well, right? So F is faster implementation times in there. Okay, so we're starting to see some of the things that are as they're emerging. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll give you another 10 seconds and we'll wrap up on this one. But we're starting to see that this faster implementation times are in there, reduced costs and scalability. Jason, Chris, Justin, what do you think? Are these the types of numbers you see in as this type of experience you have when you're talking to your customers?
Yeah, it looks pretty common with what we see a lot of the times, Jim.
Okay, and we'll push those.
But it seems like across the board, these are all things we hear from our clients, and it's not surprising. I don't think faster implementation times and reduction in costs kind of go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah, but I love the fact that the implementation times that we've actually twigged to this, that you can't implement the way we did. I've been around in the business for a long time. You can't talk about these, we'll implement in 6 months things anymore. People are talking about, can you do it in a month? Can you do it in a day? And I think that implementation time and is there. The costs are great. But by the way, we do this survey of Canadian CIOs all the time, and one of the things that we've really gotten into is that the reduced costs, and this troubled me for a little while, reduced costs in terms of cloud. Most companies are then taking that saving and reinvesting it in innovation. So, if you think it's just a cost-cutting exercise, and I think you guys might agree, it really isn't. People are taking that valuable money and investing it in things. We push these live, so can we go on to the next one? Sophia, you're over there? Okay. So we're going to try another poll with you, and you did great, audience, so give yourselves a hand on there. Poll 2. I want to talk to you about where you are on your cloud journey. So whereabouts are you in there? So we'll show you that poll as well in there. So we'll give you that poll 2 in there. So where are you with the cloud journey? Are you exploring? Are you just starting in there? Are you experimenting? Do you have an implementation going on? Are you at the nirvana where everything is cloud first? Or are you somewhere else? So you help me out on the first one. Come on, guys, or ladies and gentlemen. Don't mean to be sexist about this. So jump in there and give us your answers on that poll. Thank you very much. So a lot of people just exploring so far in there. Jason, you can, Chris, Justin, you can see this in there. So a lot of exploring. That's probably good at a webinar like this. Just starting. We got some who are doing an initial implementation. And at least one or more in there in cloud or already at cloud first. This is great in there, guys. What do you think? This it's a good audience for you. A lot of people exploring, but I think I'm impressed to see there's a number of people who are describing themselves as cloud first out there, and it's not just a couple. That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I'm hoping that the slides that we have today it kind of suits. It suits what this poll is kind of showing us here. So I think everyone will be interested in what we have here.
I hope so too. We can push that live for the audience. You can see that in there, and then we'll move on into our main presentation. Thank you for that to the audience. That's great because it helps orient us from the point of view of the participants and the presenters today, so we can get a good idea of what you're doing. So. Just a little more on the presentation itself. We're just going to go through a little bit of the agenda of what we're going to cover coming out of this. And we've got three things coming up, and each of these talented gentlemen will present one section of that. But we're going to talk about infrastructure as code and automation. We're going to talk about cloud backups, and we're going to talk about business outcome-driven initiatives. And I think all of that reflects what we will reflect some of the things that we've been hearing from you today. And we'll take your questions. But we're going to move to our first presenter now. And so, Jason, you're on. So take us through this infrastructure as a code. We've had a great discussion on this, and I'm looking forward to even hearing this again.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, my name is Jason Bent, and I'm a senior Azure consultant at Stratiform. Today I'm going to be covering infrastructure as code and automation. Teams who implement infrastructure as code can deliver stable environments rapidly and at scale. And these teams also avoid manual configuration of environments and enforce consistency. Infrastructure as code is the process of managing and provisioning computers through definition files. This includes infrastructure such as networks, virtual machines, load balancers, and even the connection topology in a descriptive model. Just like the principle of source code and the fact that it always generates the same binary, infrastructure as code will always generate the same environment. Looking at a traditional deployment, the example I have on this slide, we have a developer who makes a request for an environment. This request then meets an operations member who evaluates the request, understands what's needed to be deployed. This may include load balancer changes or pretty much always virtual machines. Once those virtual machines are deployed, the ops member would then configure that virtual machine. So whether that's operating system changes to make it ready for the developer or possibly even setting up the application as well. They would then hand off this service to the developer, and the developer would then validate this service to ensure that it is what they need before moving it into a usable state. So if we look at the traditional deployment method, it's pretty resource intensive. We need, multiple resources in multiple places in order to actually complete the request. It's also pretty time consuming. The developer requesting to the operations team member takes time, as well as the deployment and configuration. All these resources have their own schedules and are often facing multiple day-to-day tasks. It's also error prone. At any one of these steps, there could be errors. There could be an error in the request. There could be a misconfiguration by the ops member. Even the final validation may be missing some errors, and we'll find the errors later once it reaches a production state. Contrasting it with infrastructure as code in more of a DevOps sort of fashion, we're looking at declarative notations. So infrastructure as code is declarative, so I can tell the machine what I want, and it will get to that state. This makes it a lot more efficient as well because we can take the human out of the equation. The environment also becomes more predictable. What we stand up today and tomorrow will always get to the desired state every time. We used to focus a lot on writing applications, and the environment would take a lot of human effort to set up. This setup is pretty straightforward, but it's a lot of manual tasks, and computers are inherently good at doing tasks in a repetitive fashion. So infrastructure as code really kind of solves that issue. It's also involved to solve the problem of environmental drift. Without infrastructure as code, teams must maintain the settings of the individual deployed environments, and over time, these deployments can actually become what's called a Snowflake server. And Snowflake servers are named so because they're unique. They can't be reproduced quickly. They have a lot of administrative and maintenance overhead, lots of manual processes that can lead to errors and inconsistency among environments. So with infrastructure as code, we're able to actually protect against misconfiguration, but we're also able to monitor for this configuration drift. If we can monitor for this drift, we can ensure that we don't have Snowflake servers. It also allows us to use source control. Source control lets us put the whole setting in something such as TFS or Git So it actually lives as an artifact with the code for the application itself. And this brings a way for us to record and control the actual settings. For us at Stratiform, in this picture here, we have the shell and the application. In Azure terms, the shell is really what we use ARM templates for. They set up the outer walls of the VM or the load balancers or the virtual network or connectivity. We use ARM templates primarily for that focus. Once we set up the shell, inside we have the application, and this is where it becomes more unique to every customer. We find that there's a lot of unique things inside of these shells, and it brings a lot of value to be able to package this into a repeatable, predictable model for our customers. And we do that with Azure Automation DSC. And DSC is, you probably used it on premises before, and it's just in Azure. It's PowerShell desired state configuration. And it's actually used to monitor for any application drift, so any changes in the configuration. Azure Automation also allows us to hold all of the modules for this and configurations in an automation account in the cloud.
Okay, Jason, can I jump in for just a second in there? And you've answered this question for me once before, but I am the slow student in the class. What is configuration drift?
So configuration drift is any configuration changes that can actually happen to a VM, whether it's intentional or unintentional from updates or a manual process by either developer or an ops member. Configuration drift is, say we had a web server and it had a specific version of IIS installed, and that's the way it was meant to be. But over time, there's been patches to that server, there's been people on that box, and over time, maybe some of the settings have been changed from where they originally were when it was deployed.
Okay, like somebody dropped.
Yeah.
Somebody changed the security settings to something bad or something, so you actually can monitor. That's cool.
Yeah.
And you have explained this to me before, but thank you again.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so we can monitor that, and with monitoring that, we can actually act on it, so we can reverse those settings, or we can even just alert on them, so we know that our servers are all in line with what we're requiring for our applications. An example that I was going to use today is one of our customers that we had at Stratiform. They were an energy-based organization. They had a SharePoint environment, which was rather large, and it had SQL backend, and they're doing a lot of work in Azure. And what they wanted was a server role-based deployment. So whether it was a web front end, an application server, a SQL box, a developer machine, they wanted to be able to deploy based on server role using infrastructure as code. They also wanted an easy and repeatable process. So they wanted to be able to give this to a developer or a functional member, or even have infrastructure be able to stand up with the same tools and scale out or redeploy their environment. The other requirement that they were interested in is monitoring configuration. So this is that configuration drift. They wanted to ensure that the operating system was in compliance. They wanted to make sure that SQL was deployed correctly and had the correct trace flags on it. They wanted to make sure that SharePoint had all the correct modules, and they wanted to monitor for any changes in these environments. They also wanted it to be an automation-ready framework. So they wanted to have a full framework, so in the future, if they wanted to use Azure Automation or Azure Logic Apps or Azure Functions to add more automated processes into these deployments, that it would be ready for that. So what we ended up deploying for them was a template library, and this ARM template library had all the roles. If it was a web front end, or if it was a web front end that needs to be load balanced, or if it was a QA box, or if it was an all-in-one dev box with Visual Studio, we had ARM template library that was deployed for them for these reasons. It then linked into Azure Automation DSC to actually configure the servers for them, add them to the domain, set up the security settings. Everything to do with the actual application configuration is run through Azure Automation DSC. We deployed an iterative approach so that they could scale out their environment fairly easily. They could add in a web front end. It would automatically add it to the load balancer. It would be configured, and they wouldn't have to worry about any manual processes to actually scale out their environment in case they needed to for any reason. And the process also supported a full dev, QA, test, production deployment topology as well. Infrastructure as code fits in really well with Azure and its agile technologies and frameworks. And a good example of virtual machine scale sets, for anyone who's not aware of virtual machine scale sets, they're an Azure compute resource that can be used to deploy a managed set of identical VMs, and all these VMs will have the same configuration. They're really used to target services such as big compute, big data, and containerized workloads. The big thing with virtual machine scale sets is you want your VM to all be the same. And VSC and infrastructure as code is a really great way to kind of manage that problem, because we can ensure that all our machines are the same. As soon as it's deployed, we can monitor it for any drift, and we can act on it appropriately. This gives us an agile, controllable way to actually manage our infrastructure. It gives us a scalable and accelerated environment, and it allows our users to have a reliable, adaptable, and predictable model. So teams who implement infrastructure as code can deliver stable environments rapidly and at scale. They can avoid manual configuration of environments and enforce consistency by representing the desired state of the environments via code. And this prevents runtime issues caused by configuration drift or missing dependencies, and allows us to deploy our services more reliably.
Yeah, I think that's Jason. I think that's. I don't know. We do a lot of work in the cloud, and that's actually one of the key things. I'd be interested in hearing from the audience to see if that's an issue that they have. One of the things when you can spin up servers more easily, virtual servers, and you can be more responsive. You move at high speed, but the cost of error, that thing you called configuration drift, that's something you really have to watch for. And I know this from firsthand experience. That's a very interesting. And valuable piece from all of this. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
So we're ready to move on. Anything else you want to get into, Jason?
That's it for me. If there's any questions or anything that.
Great. And we'll pick up any questions. We're going to move on to Chris. And Chris is the solutions architect for Stratiform. He's going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and that's cloud backups. I'll just make my joke as a CIO, but it's true. You can be late on a project, you can still keep your job. You can even go over budget, and you can still get your bonus. But lose the data once, and you're filling out your next job application in pen because they take your computer away when they fire you. So it's backups are near and dear to my heart, backups and restoration. So I'm looking forward to this one, Chris. So roll forward with us.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Jim. Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Holsworth. I'm a solution architect here at Stratiform, and my section here today is going to be talking a bit around backup in VR, and then specifically how we can utilize Azure to kind of enable greater capability, at the same time taking advantage of the scalability of the cloud and kind of the cost savings that you would see with that. So first things first, I just want to talk a bit about the challenge that we're talking about. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that we're seeing data rates growing at an incredible rate today. And I think I saw a stat not too long ago that noted that 90% of the data that has been created in the world today was actually created in the past 2 years, which is pretty incredible. That rapid rise in data, what does that mean year over year? Well, I mean, you could look at the cost of actually purchasing storage, and while the cost of storage per terabyte is falling, it's not falling at the same rate that data is growing, which means we've got additional costs and really just more stuff to buy and manage. Additionally, we've got those operational challenges. So talking about like I said, managing that data, the cost of purchasing storage for it, and then further having to back up all that data, have hardware available for your backup services, paying for an application to be able to handle the backups, training staff to manage it, and that doesn't even kind of get into all the complexity around off-site storage and dealing with tape libraries and having all these old tapes that the business said we needed to keep our data forever. So we've got all these old tapes, and we've got these ancient tape libraries that does anyone even know how to plug them in or even recover that data? So lots of challenges there operationally. What does that all lead to? Well, it's expensive now to protect all of that data. And with the expense and the complexity, it means that important data that probably should be backed up might not actually be being backed up. Now, imagine a world where there was something easier and maybe more scalable, perhaps something as a service. That'd be pretty sweet. So enter Azure Backup. So Azure Backup is a service made available by Microsoft that kind of consists of a couple different components. So first, you've got the Azure Recovery Services Vault, which is a platform-based service in Azure, which means basically that Microsoft handles all the hardware, software, management, et cetera, of the actual backup infrastructure and backup service. And all you really have to worry about is the configuration of your backup policies, doing your backups and restores, and basically onboarding the things that you want to back up. The second piece of the puzzle is the Azure Backup Agent. So you would deploy a backup agent to a workload that you wanted to protect, and the Azure Backup Agent is capable of doing file and folder level backups and restores, as well as system state backups. The Azure Backup Agent is also capable of backing up those Azure workloads that you might have, so Azure virtual machines, and so you can back up and restore Azure VMs. Now I'm sure you're thinking, well, all that's great, but I'm currently in a hybrid state or maybe only on premises today, and I have a VMware or a Hyper-V environment, and so how do I protect that? Well, that's where Azure Backup Server comes into play. And Azure Backup Server is an application which is actually based on System-Centered Data Protection Manager, for anyone who's familiar with that. And basically you deploy Azure Backup Server onto a server on premises or in Azure, and you can configure Azure Backup Server to protect Hyper-V or VMware workloads, so you can back up and restore your VMs. And it's also capable of doing some application level backups and restores as well, so protecting SQL Server or Exchange or SharePoint. And it can also do file level backups and system state if you wanted to configure for that. Where the magic kind of comes in, though, is that you can configure Azure Backup Server, firstly, for your short-term backups to local storage, but the magic is in you would maybe keep those recovery point objectives quite low, so you're only keeping, at least with some of our clients, the way we've configured it is maybe you're only keeping, say, 2 to 7 days on that local storage, and then the rest of it all gets piped up into that Azure Recovery Services Vault, taking advantage of the storage capabilities of the cloud. So if you need to do a restore, you just pull it out of Azure and then restore on-prem as needed. Of course, the amount that you decide to keep locally would ultimately depend on what the recovery objectives are that are defined by your organization, so your mileage might vary a little bit there. What we've seen at Stratiform for some clients as well when you're deploying this stuff is, although my slide shows Azure Backup Servers at the main data center and then the agents at your branch office, you might choose to kind of mix and match it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to deploy it like this. You could deploy both services in multiple locations or kind of pick your poison sort of thing. As far as pricing is concerned, Azure Backup is based on instance-based licensing. So each protected workload, you pay a small licensing fee, and then additionally you pay Azure storage costs for holding onto that data. So that kind of gives us a zero footprint for instances where we're using that agent, really small footprint where we're using Azure Backup Server, and then no costs really for having to deal with software or kind of the management aspects there. Even the Azure Backup Server application itself is kind of given to you for free, so it's just those costs that I mentioned. So the key takeaway from this slide that I want you guys to kind of take in is that Azure Backup gives you kind of a simple and scalable way for you to deal with your company's backup story, while allowing you to take advantage of the Azure cloud and that scalability with storage that we talked about.
So hey, Chris, can we take a question in here? Is that okay? Just to jump in.
Yeah, you bet.
We got a smart audience, so we're getting good questions here. And I think you might have covered it, but it's this integration of cloud and non-cloud was a question, how you deal with that in there. And I think we talked about this earlier when we were chatting. How do you deal with that in the Azure world?
Integration of cloud applications with non-cloud applications?
Yeah, in terms of backup.
Yeah, I guess with regards to backup, so let's say, for example, you had an on-premise application that used a database that existed in Azure. You can use the exact, if that's what the question is, you could use the exact same software basically to back up the on-prem pieces. It all fires into the Recovery Services Vault, And if you had an Azure backup, or sorry, rather, if you had a virtual machine in Azure that was running SQL Server, so now you've got a cloud-based resource, you can use Azure Backup to back up those guys as well. So from a backup perspective, that's kind of how that would work.
And I think the chat is well about big data there, Jim, and
yep.
And
yeah,
maybe to help with that potentially, depending on the technology you use, if it's Commvault as an example, there's deduplication databases. If it's Azure Backup, it's a synthetic full incremental forever. So yes, your initial seed is going to take a heck of a long time if it's multiple terabytes and you have 100 meg line, but it's that initial seed followed by your incrementals forever, which should just be block level changes.
Yeah, and I think to answer the big data thing, I've got a slide a little later on where we can talk about how you could overcome some of the challenges with, like, if I have a huge amount of data that I want to get into the cloud, how do I get it there or seed it easily? And I can give you some examples of technologies you can use there.
Cool. Let's let you move on then. We'll get back to it. Thank Davey in the audience for that question, and we'll move on. If we don't get a question now, guys, don't worry about it. We will get them at the end. Terrific, Chris.
Perfect. Cool. So the next kind of slide here, I wanted to chat with you guys about, as much as we talk about Azure Backup and the tools that Microsoft makes available within Azure natively, also discussing other backup solutions that you might be able to take advantage of. So today on-premises, you might have one of these three vendors that we have listed on the screen here, or potentially something else. I put these three on because they're kind of three of the market leaders. But the point is here is that these backup solution or these backup providers often have partnerships with Microsoft and integration capabilities into Azure. And so if there's options there for you to continue to take advantage of the investment that you've already made in these backup products, while at the same time leveraging that scalability and cost savings for storage in Azure. So the way that this would work would be, let's take Commvault, for example. You've got Commvault set up doing backups every day like you normally do, but instead of using a tape library or some other media to deal with your long-term or off-site storage, you would instead use an Azure storage account as that backup target for the long-term storage. And so the kind of value that you see here is that it gets to go into Azure storage and take care of or deal with the cost savings and scalability there. And as well as I wanted to mention that the storage account has three kind of different flavors that you can take advantage of. There's hot storage, which you can kind of think of as just standard Azure storage, and that's where your backups that are maybe more regularly accessed would go. There's cool storage, where Microsoft gives you a break on the actual storage cost, but there's a small charge with actually pulling the data out of the storage account. And so that would be more for backup or data that's really not accessed very often and is just kind of sitting there stagnant for the most part. And then third is another option that they've recently released in the public preview, which is Azure Archive Storage. And the story with that one is that it's really for data that's truly archived and you're almost never going to touch. And so again, there's an increase or a decreased charge for the actual storage of the data, slightly more increased charge for pulling it out of there. And then with Azure Archive Storage, it's meant for workloads or backups wherein you have longer recovery time objectives. Because with hot and cool, you can access your data pretty much instantly. With archive storage, you're kind of looking more like minutes or hours before you can access it. But really kind of cool, cost-effective options there for that. So key takeaway here is if your organization already has an investment or a preference in using another vendor's on-prem solution, there's still other options for you there, or there's still options there for you to take advantage of that flexibility and cost savings with Azure that we've been talking about. Cool. So next thing here, I wanted to chat with you guys a little bit about another solution that Microsoft has available. And it's not so much in the backup space as it is in the disaster recovery space, and that's Azure Site Recovery. Azure Site Recovery provides an orchestration and replication engine wherein you can basically take those workloads you have on premises, either in your VMware or Hyper-V environments or even a physical server, and it will replicate those virtual machines up into Azure storage. And so what that means is that during normal business operations, you're only paying for a license per protected workload as well as the cost of the storage that you're using. Now, in the event of a disaster, that's where the orchestration engine comes in, where it will facilitate a failover or a spinning up of those virtual machines into Azure. So the VMs that currently sit in storage kind of dormant during normal operations will be spun up and a VM will come up, and now your workload is alive again in Azure, where as before, we've lost it due to some disaster. At that stage, you would pay for the compute time that's utilized by that virtual machine, but that's the only time you would pay that. And that kind of differs in kind of approach to what a traditional disaster recovery scenario might look like, wherein you're running a hot data center, you pay for all that hardware, whether you use it or not, and it's kind of just sitting there waiting. In this case, we have enormous cost savings because we don't have to run those VMs all the time. Additionally here, ASR does have some extra capabilities. There's some test failover capabilities, so you can actually do a test of your VMs and fail them over into a completely isolated environment to make sure that things are actually working the way that you're expecting them to, which is always good so that we don't get surprises when we do a real failover. It also has some capabilities around workflow wherein you can configure it so you can just determine what fails over first and then insert some automated steps if you want for doing health checks or whatever automated requirements you have for ensuring the workload comes up healthy. Or you can insert some manual steps as well if you wanted your ops guys to kind of touch certain things or validate anything as things are coming up. One thing I like to mention is there's some of the deployments that we've done here at Stratiform. A couple examples are we've used Azure Site Recovery to help an organization actually fail over or plan the failover of their Dynamics AX environment into Azure. And we've also used it for even helping organizations just migrate virtual machines into Azure. So as much as it's a disaster recovery tool, it's also a really good migration tool, which is pretty great.
So Chris, sorry, Chris, just tell me a little bit more about the conversion tool. So if you're migrating into the cloud, how do you use that?
Yeah, so it's depending on, it's a little different depending if it's VMware or Hyper-V, but basically the idea is that the Azure Site Recovery engine itself will do that conversion. So if you have VMware and it's a VMDK, you don't have to convert it to a VHD and then have ASR move that up. ASR just takes care of the conversion for you.
Wow, cool. Sorry to interrupt, but I get to ask questions. I'm the host. Yeah.
Totally. Key takeaway from this slide as I wrap it up is just that Azure Site Recovery allows for huge savings for DR as we no longer have to run another hot data center like we might do traditionally. And it also makes DR feasible for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that otherwise might not have even had the capability for doing DR.
Great.
Finally here, I wanted to just touch on a couple of other data protection options available in Azure. I'm not going to do a deep dive on these guys, but I just wanted to give you kind of a bit of a taste of some other stuff that's going on. So first there's Azure File Sync, which is actually in preview right now, but the idea with Azure File Sync is that you can tier your existing file servers into Azure. So you get to take advantage of the scalability of Azure file storage, but still utilizing the bits and pieces that you have on-prem. And where the magic comes in here is the ability to free up storage space on those file servers by keeping only the newest and most recently accessed files local, while still allowing you to actually see all the files and access the entire namespace through a seamless cloud recall capability. So that one's pretty cool. I wish I could talk more about it, but definitely reach out to Stratiform if you want to kind of hear a bit more about it.
I have a hunch people will. We got a lot of questions on this, and it's really great. We might not get to them all here, but I'm sure you guys will follow up. But we'll arrange follow-up for them if we don't get to them in there. But I think there's a lot of. You could do a much deeper dive on this, Chris. It's great that you kept
totally.
it.
Yeah. Store Simple is another tool that's very similar to Azure File Sync in the sense that you can, but the difference would be that it's an actual physical hardware appliance that you put in your data center. But the magic of that one is that it also tiers up into Azure, and it has a whole bunch of other capabilities like, having some intelligence around tiering between solid state and spinning disk, creating cloud snapshots and those sorts of things. So again, that could have a deep dive all on its own. Additionally, there's Azure Key Vault, which in the protection story is really around kind of protecting secrets and encryption keys and those sorts of things. There's the Azure Import and Export Service and Data Box, which might be interesting to the gentleman that asked a question earlier around how to actually seed big data into Azure. The idea here is that with the Import-Export service, you've got hard drives that you load up with data, and you encrypt it, and you ship it off to Azure, and they plug it in their data center, and you have access to it in a storage account. The Data Box is a new one, which is still in preview today. I'm not sure if it's available in Canada yet, but with that one, they send you a disk array, you load it up with data, and you fire it back to them. So pretty cool. They're trying to make it as easy as possible to get your stuff into Azure. And then finally is the geo-redundant storage. All the storage accounts in Azure, and really most of the platform services in Azure offer geo-redundancy, meaning that they will actually replicate data between data centers and between regions in Azure to keep your data safe. And there's a whole bunch more that I could get into here. I also noted some kind of successful client hybrid deployments that we've done here at Stratiform. Wish I had time to get into all those, but by all means, reach out to us if you guys want to hear more. And to kind of wrap up the whole thing, we talked a bit today about Azure Backup and how Azure Backup and Azure Backup Server can kind of transform your backup story. We talked about how you can utilize or continue to utilize those third-party options and take advantage of Azure. We talked about Azure Site Recovery and the DR capabilities that introduces, and kind of the feasibility of DR that it provides for small, medium-sized businesses, and then those other data protection options that I mentioned here at the end. So thanks a lot, guys. That's it for me.
Oh, fabulous. And Chris, thank you. We could have gone on a lot longer on this, and I'm sure there's a lot more, and we'll continue this conversation, I'm sure, in here. I'm going to skip the questions, and not that we're ignoring them. They're great. Keep them coming, but we'll get to them at the end if we can. But I don't want to miss this next section either, because as fascinated as was with the backup, this is dear and dear to my heart, business outcomes and business outcome-driven initiatives. So, Justin, we're going to bring you in for to cover this section, and then we'll wrap up with questions at the end. So, Justin, you want to come in? Yeah,
that sounds good. I did answer the one IBM Spectrum. There looks like BA12, but Jason and Chris can probably answer some of those questions in the background while I'm presenting as well. So Justin Kurtenbach, I'm a field CTO with Stratiform here. I'm here to talk to you guys about business outcome-driven initiatives and really focus on some of our experience we've had in success in that space, because it's something consistently coming up with organizations. So typically us, when we're working with our customer base to understand and evaluate cloud technologies, there's a number of reasons why people might be looking at cloud, and these 5 come up quite often around efficiency, velocity, flexibility, and that might be the ability to dynamically scale resources or deploy and change services in real time, to creating recyclable and cost-effective standard designs, and we've chatted about some of those here today. But where we more often than not see a lot around quality, and quality might just be something like business continuity capability or a standardized set of consistent services. But where we're going to focus today, and typically what drives towards business outcome-driven initiatives, is the capability that cloud technology can bring to an organization, and that's really around features and functions that you may not have the capability on-prem, or if you were looking at implementing it, it would be a significant investment to achieve that same capability. So what we find is really, really important in working with your business partners throughout the organization is understanding the capability of technology, because the maturity does exist, and just gaining a level set as far as what that capability looks like. So the 3 areas we're going to chat about in relation to capability in this slide is around IoT and the Internet of Things, data and analytics, and artificial intelligence and cognitive services. So if we look at IoT, the data ingestion side for IoT is really the IoT hub and event hubs within Azure. And that's the capability to take millions of events per second, should you need be, of sensor-based devices and shipping that up. And stream analytics and time series insights really drives in how comfortable are we that these sensors are online and functional and capable of sending that data up to the service. If we look more at the data side, we're looking at tables and storage or Cosmos DB, and using a non-SQL database, understanding the capability of that and why that makes sense, and maybe the ability to ingest, whether it be an HVAC sensor versus a waterline sensor versus a wind speed, and not having to have unique table type of storage. And Cosmos DB works really, really well for that. So most importantly, I think the presentation layer and how are you actually servicing that data to the consumer of the service? Is that through a web app? Is that through a mobile app? What is it, and how are people actually using and making use of the data once it's up there? If we move more into that data and analytics side, if we're looking at machine learning and capabilities like the Azure bot service, how might you use that within your organization, to data warehouses and data factories, to HD Insight and Hadoop? Are you looking at big data and Hadoop clusters to help process that? If we move more into the artificial intelligence and cognitive services side, we might there's probably a lot of education there on vision services. What are we doing with that? If we're using computer vision API, maybe we're taking snapshots of a chicken barn and counting chickens and determining, is that brown color of dirt or is that the brown color of a chicken, and using cognitive services to help with that. To knowledge services, maybe it's predicting and recommending items more in some type of e-commerce scenario. If we look at language, maybe we want to teach our applications to understand commands from end users and utilizing cloud technology to do that. If we look at speech services, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar, but real-time speech translation, Microsoft can take 50 source languages and in real time convert down to 7 destination languages. Super cool to see that in action, and how that might even integrate with Skype as an example. To search services, and maybe you're looking at the Bing Auto Suggest or Bing Search. So I think coming out of this slide, really to help drive intelligent conversations around use cases, understanding that technology and its capability is super important. And just because the capability isn't there today doesn't mean it won't be there tomorrow, and really staying on top of that emerging technology stream. Which moves us on to, well, how do you start driving those conversations with your business partners? And if you look at this, it's a pretty busy little table here. So on the left-hand column of use cases, that kind of identifies use cases, followed by the right-hand row focusing on what's the business value of those use cases within an organization. So I'm going to give you guys an example of an Internet of Things type of workshop that was ran to create this matrix for a construction-based firm, where we went in and kind of established and said, what is it we're looking at for use cases? And I'll quickly skim through some of these use cases and maybe provide some relevancy to some of them. But if we look at sound monitoring, that might be from a regulatory and compliance, and that's applicable to more than construction firms. That can be across all horizontals of organizations. To air quality monitoring, maybe that's silica dust monitoring, because we're building a high-rise building, cutting concrete next to a hospital. Personal safety wearables from a vital sign monitoring. If we look at some of the environmental monitoring, it's a wind speed monitoring, because we've got it from a health, safety, environmental gauge the wind speed. If we look at ultrasound monitoring, that might be garbage pickups. Let's throw ultrasound monitors across garbage bins, and rather than picking up those garbage bins on a weekly basis, let's alert when they hit 80%, and let's plug machine learning in there, and let's optimize the truck, the actual logistical side for the truck, and where they should be making the pickups first in the most efficient way to do those garbage pickups, to tool tracking and asset inventory. Then if we drive over, it kind of focuses on some of those, well, what's the benefit there? Maybe it's from a sales advantage perspective. Maybe there's a cross-site trending, a historical reporting on how we were more efficient at different job sites. There's probably a health, safety, environmental component to a cost efficiency, or even a productivity which might equate to cost efficiency. And I think really driving that out and building this matrix, and that's going to help you define the prioritization of where you might be investing your time first to drive that quick time to value on some of these solutions. So that, go on, Jim.
No, I was just going to say, so this is a really good way of taking all of that stuff from your workshops and you put it together to say, okay, here's the use cases, here's all the areas they affect or the benefits that can accrue from them, and that's how you make the things stand out in terms of here's the ones you should most prioritize. Like I would guess one of these ones that covers just about almost every area is going to be one of the ones you'd be thinking about first. Have I got that correctly?
Yeah, and it might differ from organization to organization. If you're looking to save a 1-2%, and that's the goal, cost efficiency might be your number one driver for an IoT. If it's more from a health, safety, environmental, and I think prioritizing what is the most important thing for your senior leadership team will help define, Jim, on prioritization as well.
I like this because the framework, because it makes and using both of those things, some things are more important than others, and the number of occurrences as well. But this is the type of thing that executives want to see. We're not just doing cloud; we're actually having an impact on our business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that takes us on to the next slide. Is this is all good that you've identified this matrix, but how do you actually sell that story? And we've got a couple minutes here for me to chat through here, and we've had a lot of success in really building a storyboard for your leadership team and your executives that's non-technical driven, but help them understand, well, let's go through a day in the life of this construction firm and what that might look like. So we're building a 12-story condo building in a densely residential area, and what we're doing is Monday morning we have a set of concrete trucks, 5 of them showing up. But 2 p.m. on Sunday, one of the heaters in the middle of winter shuts off, and that site foreman gets a SMS text message to say, hey, we've dropped below an acceptable temperature range. We should ship somebody out there. And by 6 p.m. that night, sure enough, one of the generators ran out of diesel and shut down. So by 6 p.m. we actually had that heater back up and running. So 6 a.m. that next morning, somebody logs in with their remote login securely with B2B to say, what's the temperature? What's the wind speed? Do we have to call an early cancellation on the site? No, we're good. But by 6:45 a.m., somebody kicks those generators on, and we've got an alert that says, hey, call the guy that's on site here and tell him he's outside of compliance. We can't turn those generators on until 7 a.m. that next day. Job site opens up here. Concrete trucks show up at 8 a.m. and they're able to successfully pour that pad because the rebar and ground is warm. By 10 a.m., we've got some integrations into Environment Canada, and we've got some early weather warning forecasts to say, hey, HSE individual on site, let's pay attention to that, and let's make sure that the wind speed doesn't pick up to put us in unsafe conditions. By 11 a.m., we've got a SMS text for a decibel range violation. We go visit, turns out it's a set of motorcycles that are sitting there next to the construction site, and we're able to log that through a mobile app to say, no, we were within compliance, this came from an outside source. Actually, at one, we've got the real estate firm checks in on the job site status, and we've got B2B communication enabled for them to securely authenticate, to using that at a sales call back at head office to demonstrate real-time job site statistics to help them close another similar deal, to even some of the post-job site finishes where we've got multiple noise violations that were received, and we're able to demonstrate historical compliance and then preventative actions for future state. What that also allows us to do is historical logging and reporting to say we were actually more cost effective on this job than any other job out there, and that kind of drives us in, and we're able to demonstrate real value here to say, well, we actually saved $25,000 in concrete fees on the Monday morning because we were able to do early detection of a heater failure, and that equates to $25,000 in savings on this job site, and really drives that 1% cost savings that we were trying to achieve. And where we've seen is this really drives a lot of success in taking it outside of the technical realm. For IT people, I tend to move down that direction quite heavily a lot of the times, and trying to put it in more business-focused terms.
Yeah, Justin, I can't say enough about that in terms of, we tend to toss things around, and I've done a lot of work in IoT awareness with people, and one of the biggest reasons why IoT doesn't move forward is that people don't understand the business implications. And I think, in fairness, and this is from an old guy who's a CIO, don't presume your CIO is going to follow you on the technical argument either way, because he or she has to go explain this to the business. So when you give a day in the life of the business or can root these things in real business value, you're doing everybody a real service. It's terrific. Thank you.
Cool. So we've got a quick here. I'll skim through this in about 2 minutes to hopefully give us a little bit of time to focus on some questions. Who are the three of us? So we work for an organization called Stratiform. We've been 5 years plus in operation. We became a PCM company in early 2017 here. About 65 contractors with 4 regional branch offices across Canada. We're a Microsoft Gold partner in multiple, whether it be cloud productivity, cloud platform. And we've got a variety of clients in a ton of different business sectors, from oil and gas to construction to retail, you name it. Where we focus is we've got advisory level services, professional services being more of that project-based delivery to managed services after the fact and helping support the technologies we've implemented. Some of our customers, just some common names that you'll probably see there around pipeline to energy and utilities, to the tourism industry, construction firms, Go Auto we have up there. So, and then I guess just to recap who the three of us are. I'm Justin Kurtenbach. We've had Jason Bank talked about infrastructure as code, and Chris Holdsworth. You've got all of our contact information there. We're more than happy to chat with you guys direct if you have any questions, or if you have some more general inquiries. You can hit us up at info@stratiform.ca.
Great. Thank you, Justin. We'll leave that up there. We'll flip by the thank yous there, but can somebody flip back to the addresses, and we will send these to you. You guys might want to get a hold of these guys. We've got some great questions in there. Some of them, and I didn't interrupt earlier with all of them because some of them are pretty detailed, and I'm sure that the guys will follow up with each and every one of you on these questions. And if there's something general, Justin, Chris, Jason, we can send that out to the group as well if we think there's something of general interest that we haven't answered. But I want to thank you all for this. I think for anybody out in the audience, you need 3 smart guys and a whole team to help you with the Azure journey. I think these gentlemen have proven themselves to be quite knowledgeable. I've learned a lot. I've made a lot of notes myself in this. So thank you very much, Jason, Chris, and Justin for doing this. I also want to thank Stratiform in general because, like I said, we couldn't do these webinars and we can't do this outreach without the benefit of these companies that provide not only the funding for it, but also provide some excellent, knowledgeable people to bring you the information. So thank you very much for that. I want to make sure I just remind everybody to fill in those online evaluations and let us know what you thought in there. And that's about it. So I'm gonna leave it there. Jason, on behalf of Jason, Chris, Justin, and me, that's thank you from us, and we'll see you next time. And don't forget to fill in your survey. See you next time.